Hey class, this is going to be a lab video where we're going to cover a few different things. It may be, we're going to kind of start with one thing that's required for the final, and then a few other things after that will be sort of optional if you want to add them or not, but things that have come up as I've been working with different people throughout the semester as to, things you might want to add into the game. So hopefully it won't be too long, but not all of it is required. So just do the parts that you want to have in your game. But yeah, this will be the last lab for the semester. So hopefully you'll be able to do most of the things that you want to achieve with the game. If there's other stuff that isn't covered in one of the labs, let me know. I can share a YouTube tutorial. There's a lot of good stuff that already exists for Godot on YouTube, or we could try to come up with a solution together. Anyway, I'm going to get started as usual. For the beginning, I'm not going to really add anything new. I'm just going to be adding some code and stuff like that. Later on, I'm going to add some graphics. So I'll do that when we get there. Anyway, lab 9 was the last lab that we worked on, where we added in the portals to go to the next level, and we added a couple more levels. So what we're going to do now is, one of the things that we need to add is that when you go from one level to the next, all of this stuff gets reset, like the number of items that you've collected or any other thing that you might be tracking. So what we're going to do is add in a global script. It's actually really simple, but we are going to have to change some of the other scripts to go along with it. And then once we get that done, a lot of people have talked about adding like multiple lives. So I'm going to go over how to do that, as well as collecting new lives. So that'll be later. That part of the video will probably take longer, but it's not really required, so feel free to skip that if you're focusing on other things. But if you're looking for something to improve for the final, that could be a good thing to add in there. Anyway, I'm going to duplicate my Lab 9 project as I usually do. So I'm just going to hit Command D, and we'll call this Lab 10. So this will be the final one. And I'll be doing stuff from scratch again today, as I have for the last few labs, but I'll post the code and everything a little bit. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to open up my project.godot, and I'm going to start by adding some global variables. So let me turn on my small view. Okay. So we're going to start with scene level 1. And we're actually going to be adding a new script and adding some code and stuff like that. And we are going to have to kind of move things around. So I'll try to bookmark when there's things that you're going to need to change and what's optional and stuff like that. Your game may be a little bit different from mine at this point, but it should be mostly the same. So if you have questions or you're not sure if there are some differences or something like that, just let me know on Discord and we can take a look together. Anyway, what I want to do is make sure that this score up here doesn't change when I go from level 1 to level 2. So instead of just keeping track of the score inside of our metrics script, we're going to move that functionality into a global script. So let's look at how to do that. And global scripts are really useful for keeping track of data that needs to be persistent between levels, or even if you restart the same level. So it's something that most games are going to have if you have more than one level in your game. So let's go ahead and see how that is going to work. So what I want to do, I'm going to collapse a bunch of this stuff. And we're going to be making some changes to this little metrics section over here, which at the moment, I can't really zoom in because of the way my view is set up. Oh well. Anyway, what we're going to be doing is adding in some. We're going to be taking this item count, and instead of just changing it per level, we're going to be doing it globally. So what we'll do is we'll go to the metrics and we'll open up the script for the metrics. And so you can see I have this variable item count, and that's what, when we do get an item, we call this on item collected function. that updates the item, and then that updates the display. So it's pretty straightforward. That code is mostly going to stay the same, but there's one thing that's going to change. So we need to move this item count value somewhere where it's going to be accessible from all of the different scenes. And this metrics scene, that instance of the metrics is just inside my level 1. When we go to level 2, it still has the metrics in there, but it's a new instance of that metrics, and they're not connected. They don't talk to each other at all. So we need something else that can, kind of connect the different scenes. So we're going to create a new script for that. It's pretty simple. It's really going to have almost nothing in it. So it's not going to be associated with a specific scene. So I'm just going to make a new file inside of Godot. And I'm going to click on the folder and make sure we put it in the scripts folder. And I'm just going to call this global because it's going to save some what we usually call global variables, or values that are available anywhere in my program. So I'm going to call this Global.gd. And default template is fine. So that all looks fine. I'm just going to click create. So it extends node. That's good. We need to do that. But everything else in here I actually don't need. It's not going to have any functions. It's just going to have some variables. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back to metrics, and I'm actually going to cut. So I'm going to take my variable item count and put it back in here. So now that's literally all my script is now to start. When I go back to metrics, if I want to reference that item count, you can see it's become red, that line, because it doesn't know what that is anymore since I took that out. If I want to reference that, what I can go ahead and just say global.itemCount. That is all I really need to do to make sure that my item count is referencing the global version. And global is not like a built-in thing. That's just what we name the script, and then we're going to attach the script in our project settings. So now that I've updated my metrics script, all I have to do now is go to project settings. And now what we're going to do with our global script is we're going to auto-load it so that it's always there regardless of what scene we're in. So I go to AutoLoad in my project settings. I click the folder and go to scripts. And then I'm going to click on the global script and click open. And then that just loads it into here, and it says node name is global. So that's what I want to call it. It matches the script name, but that's also what I need to call it to reference it in my other scripts the way we wrote it. So I'm just going to click add here, and now I'm good. And actually, while I'm here, let's go ahead and change the lab name so we don't get confused. So this is lab 10 global vars. So I'm going to close that and save that. And this red should go away. Let's see if I clear this. Does it go away? Yes. Okay. So let's try that now. So I'm going to play level 1, and this will take a second, but hopefully what we'll see is, I'm going to turn the volume down a bit. When we get to level 2, my score will not change. Okay, so I'm just going to go through this as fast as I can. Oops. Okay, and so now I'm going to go to the next scene, and hopefully what we'll see, and yes we do, that number of items, the apples that I got is still 9, so that means that worked. So I'm pretty happy with that. And that's basically it for global variables. That was obviously very simple. I don't really have much else going on in my game. Like I don't have any other obstacles or anything like that, but hopefully you have other stuff that you would want to add in there. But yeah, that's basically all I really need in here as far as global variables. So, that's the only thing that's really going to be required to keep things going from one level to the next. The next thing that we're going to look at is adding lives to the player. And so that is we're going to have to add a lot more stuff for that. So if that's something that you don't really care about, if you want your player to just die immediately when they hit an obstacle, you can just leave things as is. And that'll be fine. But if you want to add player lives, I'm going to go over how to do that in the next couple of sections of this video. So let's get started with that. So I need some new art, and I created some art before I started the video. I just have a couple animations. I have my heart icon, and then I have my heart collected. And so I'm just going to download these. So I'll click on edit and go to export, and I want to make sure that this is about the same size as the apple. So this says it's 48 by 48 and the full sheet is 96 by 96. So let's take a look at my apple sprite, and that's the same, 96 by 96. So that's good. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but it's good to have, you know, relative similarity between those things. So I'm going to go ahead and download that sprite sheet, and that's going to show up in my downloads folder. So I'm going to go to downloads and then drag that in. Okay, and I made it white again so I can change the color in Godot. And then I have, let's go back to my gallery. I also have a collected, so when I collect it, it has to disappear, and we want to have a little animation for that. So I made that, and let's export it. And we have the same resolution, so that looks good. So I'm just going to go ahead and download. If you're working on this and you need help with anything, let me know. We can go over it. But I'm assuming you guys are pretty familiar with Pascal by now, or whatever editor you're using. So now I have my new sprites. I can close out of here. And let's go back to our game. So we're going to start by importing the sprites. I'm going to find this heart collected, go to import, turn filter off. That's all I really want to do, so it doesn't look too, doesn't try to you know, blur the pixel edges. So that's good. So the sprites are there. So now we need to add in our hearts to our metrics on our level 1, so we can actually see how many lives we have. And then we also need to keep track of those lives. So we're going to have to change a few things here. So let's go into the scene and add the metric, the hearts first. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. I have like my apple and then my number. I could do a similar thing where I have a heart and a number. That would be totally fine. And you could update it in the same way that you update the apple. But I want to show a slightly different way to do that, which is having a few different copies of the sprite, and then you can take one away if you lose a life, or add one if you get a life back. So let's look at how to do that. I'm just going to take my item icon here and duplicate it. There's nothing particularly special about this item icon, so there's no real reason why I need to build it from scratch. But if you did want to build it from scratch, you could just right click on metrics, go to add child node, and this is going to be an animated sprite. So you could just add an animated sprite like that. I tend to just duplicate things because it takes less time. So let's move this guy. Oops. Oh, I have my metrics locked, so let's turn that off. And oh, I locked instead of unlocked. So let's do that again. And let's try to move this guy over here. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's change this. So we need to keep track of what we're naming these icons. So we're going to call this life 1. And it's important. There's a lot of different ways to do this. The way I'm doing it is a little dumb. It's a little simplistic, but it's going to make it a lot easier for us to just build this and not worry too much about you know, learning new things. Like we'd have to learn some other coding stuff to be able to do this in a more efficient way. But for what we're doing, this is going to be perfectly fine. So all I'm going to do here is clear my sprite frames and add some new sprite frames. And then I'm going to add in my sprite. Super simple. I'm just going to click on the waffle, go into my sprites, and here's my heart icon. And so let's change the number of frames. This is kind of small, so it's probably hard to see, but I'm just lining everything up. And we're going to add some frames. There's our animation. Let's change the color. So I'm going to click on canvas item, visibility, modulate, maybe make it like a reddish pinkish color. Okay, that looks pretty good. And it's got a little animation just to, you know, give it a little life. And so now we've got that. That's pretty much all we need. All this is doing is displaying how many lives we have left. So we don't really need to connect anything else here. And so now I'm just going to duplicate this again. Notice that it made it go from life 1 to life 2. So that is good for me. I don't have to edit the name. And I'll just drag this over. And then I'm going to duplicate life 2. That gives me life 3. And I'll drag that over there. So that's all I need for my display. If we run the level again, we see that we've got like 3 little hearts right there. So that looks pretty good. I'm noticing now that my apple actually doesn't have a black outline, so it looks a little weird that they do, but I'm not gonna worry too much about that for now. I might go back and change that later if I really want to, but I think this is good enough for now. But now we have to display, you know, how many hearts we actually want to have, and we also need to make it so that the player doesn't immediately die if they lose a life. So there's a bunch of different changes we have to make in there. Let's first set up our display. So we're going to go back to the metrics script, and we're going to want to use another global variable here because we don't necessarily want the lives to reset when we get to the next level. So let's go back to our global script, and we're just going to add one more variable. This is variable playerLives, and we'll set it equal to 3. That'll be the default. You can change that if you want, either, you know, in the script itself or as a export variable. Oh, one thing I forgot to show you guys is where these variables actually show up. So let's just play the scene real quick. So one thing, when you have the global script, I didn't show this before, but if we go back to the editor and we click on remote, now you can see that global script is actually inside of this like root node. We don't really see that when we're editing because it's not there yet, but when we build the game, it builds from this thing called the root, and now it has the main scene that we added, which is level 1, and it also has this like global thing that we added in the script. So I forgot to show that, just wanted to show that real quick. Okay, so let's go back to what we were doing. So I've got these player lives. We're going to start at 3, and let's go back to metrics. And when we start the scene, we're going to update what we see for the player lives. So along with update count display, I'm also going to call update life display. And so I'll put a new function for this. And you can follow along here, or I'll also paste this code in the notes for this section. So I'll say update life display here. So we're making a new function. We just use the name of the function and then colon to open the new function scope. And so we're going to do something a little tricky here. So we're going to see how I get a reference to the item count using the $sign to reference what's in the level. If we go back to the local view, you can see there's the item count right there. And then I have life 1, life 2, and life 3. So in my script, just like I reference item count with a $sign, I'm going to use a $sign and reference life 1. And here I'm going to change the visibility. So I'm going to say life1 dot visible, and I'm going to use a nice little inline if statement here. So instead of, we've seen some if statements in other scripts. Let's see if we can find a quick example. Let's see, in our obstacle. Yeah, so here's a good example. We have if is on floor and horizontal move, da, 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 da. But we can also put an if statement into one line to make it a little bit simpler to read. So let's go back to our metrics. So it's a little complicated looking, but it means that we can kind of save a couple lines of code. So life is going to be visible, so we'll set that to true if global.playerLives is greater than or equal to 1. So if the value of the player lives is as at least 1 or greater, then we want it to be true. So true if global.playerLives is greater than or equal to 1. Else, so if global.playerLives is 0, then we don't want to show this first life 1. So we'll say else false. And the sort of simplistic way I'm going to do this for now is I'm just going to copy and paste this a couple times. There's better ways to do this that would be, you know, more reproducible, that would be more modular, that we could use like a for loop or something like that. But just for today, to keep things simple, I'm just going to duplicate this line twice and then change life 1 to life 2 and life 3. And then just say global.playerLives for life 2 has to be greater than or equal to 2. And global.playerLives for life 3 has to be greater than or equal to 3. I think my game is still running. I still hear some sound. I don't know where that's coming from. I'm going to quit Chrome in case there's something open. Okay. So that will work. Like if I play the scene, we'll see that there's 3 lives that show up. And if I just change the number of player lives by changing this to a 2 globally, we'll see that there should be only 2 lives. Oh, but they're out of order. Okay, let's go and fix that. How did I do that? This is life 3, right? Life 2, life 1. Did I do it wrong in the script? Oh, I didn't change this to 3. Okay. Now we should see. Okay, now there's 2 in the right order. Okay, so that looks good. But we need the player to actually be able to lose a life, not just die immediately. So that process is going to be a little more, we're going to have to do a few more things to get that to work. One of those things is we actually need to add a new animation for the player. And normally this has been really annoying because we have to go make a whole animation and then we have to add the visibility on all the different animation tracks. But what I'm going to do to make it a little bit simpler is I'm just going to take the death animation and I'm just going to make I'm just going to use one of the frames from that for my hit animation when the player gets hit. So we need that so that the player doesn't just die when he gets hit. And then we need to change some of the code with our obstacles so that the player doesn't immediately die and we game over when he hits an obstacle. So we're gonna have to change a couple things here. So let's get started with that. I'm gonna go back to my files and open up the player scene. I guess I could just click the scene button here. Okay, so I have this die animation where he dies. And so let's open up our animation player and take a look at that. It looks like I already made a copy of this when I was prepping. Let's just delete that. Okay, so here's my die animation. Let's zoom in a little bit. It's just 3 frames and the player just dies. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna grab one of those frames and just play it really quickly. The first couple times he gets hit and then he'll die when he really gets hit. So I'm just gonna make a new animation. I'm not gonna actually add any new sprites because I'm just gonna use this one frame. So I'm gonna take my die animation, I'm gonna click on the animation, and I'm gonna click duplicate, and then I'm gonna also click on the animation. This menu is a little strange, and I'm gonna click rename, and I'm gonna call this hit. This is when the player gets hit but doesn't die. So everything else stays the same. All of these other sprites are invisible, but I'm just gonna change the frames that we see from this die animation. I'm gonna take out the last frame, and I'm also gonna take out the first frame, if I can select it. Oh, I didn't actually get this guy. Delete that. And I'm gonna drag this guy back here, and I'm gonna make it shorter. I'm just gonna make it like 0.2 seconds, so we just see it real quick. And that's literally all it's gonna be. Since the player is gonna go from getting hit to going back to idle, we don't really need this whole dramatic animation. So that's like literally all that is. And so I'll have to change a couple of other things in the code. I don't want this to loop because I only want it to happen once, but that's pretty much all I need. If you want to have a more dramatic hit animation, obviously add more frames in there. It could be very cool, but I'm just going to leave this like that, and you'll see how it's going to look once we implement it into the scene. Okay, so now we have to adjust our obstacles. So what we want to do, I think we can just change the code a little bit. I'm going to go back to level 1. Let's open up the obstacle code. Okay. So I'm going to collapse some of these functions. And what we want to look at is when the obstacle hits the player. So that's right here, on front check body entered, if body.name equals player. So that's when the player gets hit by the obstacle. And right now we just automatically play this attack animation, which is good. And we change the speed, and then we call the enemy collision on the player, and we play the attack sound. So all of that stuff is actually totally fine. There's one thing that we're gonna have to change, but we'll come back to this. So what we wanna do is actually look at the enemy collision function, which is part of the player script. So let's go back to the player script and let's take a look. So here we go. So we have the enemy collision, And so what we want to do right now, it's just killing the player. But what we want to do now is actually ask whether the player is supposed to die or just get hit. And we can do that using the global live. So we're still going to say is alive is false. I should probably add another Boolean in here, but it's going to be simple because is alive really just makes it so you can't move the player anymore. So we'll just do that for a second so that the animations don't change while you're getting hit. But it's just going to last for a second. So first, we want to take a life from the player, regardless of whatever else happens. So we can reference global here and say playerLives. And now, instead of adding one like we do with the items, we're going to subtract one. So we're going to say global.playerLives equals global.playerLives minus 1. So if the player has 3 lives, we're knocking off 1. If they have 2 lives, we're knocking off another 1. And if they only have 1 life, then we hit 0. So if they hit 0, that's going to be different than if they still have a life left. Do I have to do, then we want to update the metrics as well. So this is actually a little tricky. I'm just gonna close these other functions. So when we lose the game, we show this game over UI, but if we're just getting hit, we just wanna update our metrics. We don't wanna end the game. So we also need a reference to metrics now. So I'm gonna copy this line here. And just like we have a reference to this game over node, we also need a reference to the metrics node. So I'm going to change this to metrics and change this to UI/metrics. This is kind of the trickier part. But what we want to do is say metrics dot update life display, because we just lost a life. So I'm going to select that. And that's pretty much it. That should work okay. One tricky thing is we have to make sure to update the metrics in all of our scenes so we don't get an error, but there's a pretty easy way to do that I'll show you once we get through this section. Okay, so we've done everything we need to do once the enemy gets hit, but we have to decide now whether to play the hit animation or the die animation. So now we're going to say if global.playerLives, and if it's greater than 0, so if global.playerLives is greater than 0, that means they still have life left. That means we don't want them to die. So we're going to say animPlayer.play, and this one we'll say is hit. And I think that's it. Else we'll say animPlayer.die. I think that should be good. We can come back if we need to change anything. And then the one last thing we need to change is this. When the animation player finishes the animation, if the animation was die, then we do want to still call game over. But if it was hit, we want to set this is alive back to true so our player can keep moving. So let's say if animName equals hit is alive equals true. Okay, so that should actually do everything we need. There's one problem with the obstacles, but we will fix that next. So let's check this out. So I'm playing, there's some snakes down here. So let's see if I get hit by a snake. Okay, I get hit. Oh, I guess I got hit twice there. Let's try it one more time because that was pretty fast. I'm gonna kill the first snake. Okay, so, I don't have any lives. How did that happen? Oh, because I didn't change my lives back to 3. Okay, so let's say that's 3. Let's try the scene again. Okay, so I'm gonna kill this guy. Let's get hit once. Okay, so one issue is that the snake animation just keeps going. We'll fix that next. Okay, I got hit a second time, and now I died. If I hit play again. Okay, so one thing, we need to set the lives back to 3. So that's a good thing to notice. So let's go back to the player. So when we do game over, we actually need to set the lives back to 3 in case they start the game again, but we won't update the display so it doesn't automatically just show those lives. So we'll say playerLives equals 3. That 3 in there is kind of hard-coded, so you might want to have another global variable that's like total lives. Actually, we can just add that in here. So let's say variable total lives equals 3. And then I guess if we're, we could change that. I guess those could be independent variables. We'll just leave that for now. So then when I go back to player, so instead of setting it to 3 here, I can say total lives. That way I can change those values without having to update my code later. Okay, so that should reset my lives. Now we have to make sure our obstacle keeps moving after they get hit. So let's go to the obstacle script. So here's the issue. We set speed to 0. So what we can do is set the speed back to what it originally is. And so we'll have to add another variable for this. So let's go back up here. So here's the speed. So let's make another variable. And this will not export because it's just going to be set to speed. So this is our temp speed. And we'll set that equal to speed. And just to be careful, let's do that again in the ready function. So we'll say temp speed equals speed. I don't know if this is actually necessary, but I'm thinking if you change the speed on one of the obstacles, we want to make sure that it takes whatever you put in there. So that might not be necessary, but I'm not going to look up what you're supposed to do there. Anyway, we just set the speed back to temp speed. But we need to check to make sure that it's the right animation. So when we say on animated sprite / animation _ finished, this one is a little different than the animation player because it's just one animated sprite. So we can actually ask if, I think I saved this as a variable, right? Yeah, animation. So if animations dot animation, I think is what it is, equals attack. So once the attack animation ends, then we'll set the speed back to temp speed. I know I'm going kind of fast through this and it's a little bit complicated. I'll post this code so you don't necessarily have to get everything exactly right. The one thing that we do have to make sure is that the attack does end. So let's go to the animated sprites, click on attack, and yes, so that's a good thing. We need to unset this loop. So now it'll just play once. When it ends, it will trigger the speed to go back to regular. And so now our obstacle should work. So now, once I get hit by a snake, let's make sure that still works. Yeah, so if I get hit, he should keep going. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so I have 1 life. Let's do one last thing while we're here. Let's see if this, Let's see if the lives also transfer to the next scene. Oh, no, I got an error, which I said we were going to get an error, and then I tried to do it anyway. So let's fix that error, and then we'll be done with this section. Okay, so the reason we got an error there is because we went to a new scene, but we don't actually have these lives, this life 1, 2, 3, in scene 2. So normally we build the whole scene and then we duplicate it so we don't have to worry about losing those references. But in this case, we're going back to a scene that already exists. But there's actually a really easy way to do this. So all I really need to do is open up level 2, and I'm gonna go down here to my metrics, and instead of rebuilding these whole things, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna merge from a scene. So I'm gonna right click. There's a special button that says merge from scene. So this lets me take elements from another scene and just throw them right in there. And since the scenes are basically the same, it's gonna know what to do with them. So I just have to pick the scene. So I'm merging from level 1. So I'm gonna click open. And then I just look through and pick the items I wanna merge. So you can see everything in the scene here. The only things I wanna merge are life 1, 2, and 3. So I'm gonna hit OK here. Now we see they've shown up in level 2, and so I shouldn't get that error anymore. So let's play through level 1 one more time and see if this works. So I'm gonna grab these apples. Let's get hit a couple times, but not die. I'm actually just gonna do it once in case I get hit later by mistake. Okay, maybe I can actually just avoid getting hit at all. Okay, we made it to scene 2. We have our 2 hearts and we have our apple. So everything worked. If we go to scene 3, we're gonna get an error. So if you have a scene 3, make sure to update that. So I'm just gonna do the exact same thing, go to level 3, scroll down to my metrics, merge from scene. And you can do this with other stuff too. It doesn't have to just be metrics or icons. You could do it with your enemies or your platforms. It's a really easy way to grab stuff from one scene and throw it into another scene. So we're merging stuff from level 2 or level 1, it doesn't really matter, but we're just gonna grab life 1, 2, and 3. And you can select as many things as you want. It'll throw it all in there. So I'm just gonna hit okay. And there we go, we have our 3 new lives. Okay, so that's basically everything that I wanted to cover as far as having those lives. The last little bit that we can do, since we can lose lives now, we may want to give the player the ability to pick up new lives. So, this part of the video, again, this is not required. I know this video is getting a little bit long, but we will talk about a few things that are really useful to understand as far as like adding new stuff to the game. So we're going to add a new type of item that you can collect, and we're going to have to add a couple things to change the way we collect items in order to know if we just collected an apple or if we just collected a life. So, if you want to take a break and pause and come back to this later, this isn't required for the final, but I think it would be useful for a lot of the games. So I just want to cover this in this last part of the video. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to use level 2 here just because there's a lot less stuff going on, and so I can add some new stuff and test it without having to run through the whole level. So I'm just going to add a couple more platforms to put some stuff on. So let's add some platforms down here, and let's put a couple up here. That might be too close. Let's do like here. Okay, can I get to those platforms? Let's find out. Okay, I can get up there, I can get down there. Okay, so that's pretty good. So we have this thing called an item that we can collect. And when we collect it, it gives us basically just a new score. So let's go ahead and add one of those things in. So when I add an item, what I do is I instance a child scene. This is a bit of review, but let's just cover it real quick. And then I open it. And this item is an apple. I just called it like a generic item, but you could give it a specific name. And it has this signal built into it, so it knows when the player gets it. Let's put the item, oops. Let's grab the item. Let's see if we can move it. No, it's kind of hard. Let's lock up our obstacles and then try again. Okay, so let's put this item down here. Okay. So now that I added this new item, one thing that's good to remember is that it has its own signal, item collected, and we have to reconnect item collected to our metrics so that it knows that we collected an item. On items underscore item collected is the function that we have to use. I'm realizing now that that's like a little generic sounding, and we are gonna have to remember that for later. But when we call this item, it just calls another function called on item collected. That's because you might be able to collect items in different ways. I don't think that's actually going to happen, so wasn't really necessary, but we just want to review that. So that's one thing that we're going to have to change once we have different types of items. But rather than like add new scripts and do all this crazy stuff, all we're going to do is just add a little bit of code into these parts so it knows which type of item it was collected. So let's go back to our level and let's make a new item. So I have this item scene here with my apple. I'm going to start by duplicating it, and I'm not going to like recreate all this stuff from scratch because it's a lot easier just to duplicate what we already have and make some simple changes. So I'm going to duplicate the item. I'm going to call this life. So it's just going to be one life that we collect. So I'm going to open up life. And it still looks like our apple. but let's just change the name of it to life. And then let's just change the 2 animated sprites. So we have this apple sprite. Let's just delete those. And we already have the heart icon open, so that's good because we already made that other sprite. So we'll add those frames. So that's what it looks like by default. I guess we should change the color. So I'll go to visibility and change the color to something. I could go find what the actual color is I put in the other one, but I'm feeling lazy, so I'm just gonna give it a random pinkish, purplish color. And then we might wanna move the sprite a bit just so it matches the collision better. Actually, it might be easier just to move the collision shape. That's close enough. So then we need our collected sprite. So I'm gonna delete these apple frames and grab my heart collected and set up these frames. I'm going a little fast here just because this is technically review. This is when the sprite gets collected. Let's change the color there as well. Again, I could look this up, but I don't want to. I'm just gonna choose a purple color. And also make sure this is not looping, because part of the functionality is that when the loop ends, that's when we collect the item. So once we've changed the art, that's pretty much all we need to do, but we are gonna have to change the script a little bit. So we have this signal when we collect an item, but all it tells us is that we did collect an item. And since previously we only had apples, we could just assume that it was an apple. But now we can't really do that, so we need to add in a new variable to say what type of item this is. So let's add an export var here, and we'll say item type. And we'll set the default to apple, so I don't have to go back and edit my other item if we just consider this the default. This is pretty lazy of me, but just for the sake of time, that's what I'm gonna do. And then we can go back to our life and just go to script variables and just change this. See, it filled in apple as the default. We're gonna change this to life. That looks fine. And I think that's good. I think that's all I have to do here. Let's go back to the script and just make sure. Oh, but the one thing we have to change is when we actually emit the signal. So when the player gets the item, it's gonna emit a signal, and that's what the metrics picks up on. So we need to change the item collected to have a variable argument. So we just put in, item type, sorry about that. Item type is now the argument. So our signal can say that something happened, but it also can add what's called an argument. So it's a parameter that tells us more about what happened. So we collected an item, but now we know which type of item it is. So we're gonna change our other code in a second. Let's go back to level 2 and add in our heart. So now I'm gonna right click on items, add an instance, and call this life. And open that up. And let's move this down here. Okay. So now we can collect a heart. Let's add the signal here. So this is where we have to be a little careful, because down here where it says receiver method, it's going to default to the name of the item, but we actually want to connect it to the same function. So we need to change this to item instead of life. And it would probably be good to just have like a generic function name here. Oh, I also connected it to the wrong place. Whoops. So you have to make sure that connected to the metrics script as well, not just whatever script happens to be open. So let's go back to 2D, click on the life. Let's disconnect this part and connect it again. So what we're actually looking for is our metrics, because we're going to collect an item here, and then let's change this. So you can either edit this or you could copy and paste in the correct name. Just, you know, if you get it wrong, it'll create a new function here. So that you'll know that if that's wrong, if it doesn't directly go to the on item collected, which is not the best function name. but that's okay. Anyway, now we have to put in our argument. So we have a new argument item type, and we just have to make sure that goes through the right places. Yeah, it is pretty silly that I wrote it this way, but that's okay. And so this is going to be item type. And so now we can ask what type of item it is. So instead of just assuming that it's an apple, we can say if item type equals apple. And obviously I'm using apple here because my items are apples, but whatever your item is, you can just call it whatever you want. It doesn't really matter as long as you're using the same sequence of letters. So if it's apple, lowercase a, it's set, then you have to make sure it's just the same. So then I have to indent the next 2 lines to make sure it's in the right code scope. And I'll post this code as well. So then if item type equals life, again, it doesn't really matter what you call it as long as it matches. So whatever you put in here, it just has to match what you put in the code. Okay. So going back to our metric script. So if the item type is an apple, then we just increase the count by 1 and we update the count display. If it's a life, then we say global.playerLives equals global.playerLives plus 1. So we add 1 to the lives, and then we update the life display. One thing that we may want to change here is that most likely you're not going to let the player just get infinity lives. So we can add another condition to this if statement that says, we have to have less than the total number of lives. So we can say, and global.playerLives is less than global.totalLives. So we added that variable earlier to reset the lives. Now this way we can also check to make sure that they don't have like 4 lives, basically is what that's doing. Okay, so now I think I've done everything I need to do to change this. Let's add in an obstacle so I can actually lose a life. So I'm gonna go to obstacle here, and my obstacles are locked, so let's unlock them and drag this guy down here. Oh, he's white again because I haven't changed the color. I don't really need to do this, but just to change the color. Okay, so now let's try it. Let's play the scene. Okay, so I'm gonna get hit first. Oh, I got hit twice. Okay, so now I'm gonna go. Okay, so I got the life and I have a new life, so that worked well. And now I have an apple, and so that's good. So I think that's pretty much everything. Actually, one thing that I just thought of, let's see if this is true. Yeah, okay. So one more thing, or actually, yeah, so if I die, I'm not gonna worry about that. If you wanted to like go back to the beginning of the game now that we have these lives when you fall off, or just lose a life, well actually, yeah, okay, let's think about this. If I just fall off, I could just lose a life. If you want to do that, let me know. We can update the code, but I don't really feel like dealing with that right now. Anyway, I think that's everything that I wanted to cover. Again, not all of this stuff is required. The global variables I think are important for the continuity of the game, but everything else is just if you want to add it. And if you have any questions as far as how to update this stuff, I know I went through a lot of this stuff pretty quickly because I didn't want to take up way too much time. But if you have questions about stuff, we can go over it in more depth on Discord or in class or whenever. And I'll post all the code, and I'll try to add some instructions and stuff as well when I post this video. Anyway, I think that's everything I wanted to cover. So let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you guys in class.